Hi, my name's Anna Serin. I'm Director of Listings Development with the Canadian Securities Exchange. You're joining us for another CSE Podcast, and I'm joined today by none other than Eduardo Carmona with the National Stock Exchange of Australia. Thank you for joining me, Eduardo.
Thank you, Anna, for having me.
You have made a long journey from Sydney, Australia to join us here in Vancouver. Is this your first time in Canada?
Very first time, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I hope you're enjoying yourself. The sunshine is out. You stopped in Toronto and you visited our offices in Toronto for a few days and then made your way out here.
That's exactly it. Had a few cold days in Toronto. I don't think I've quite experienced negative 23 before, especially coming from 40 degrees the weekend previously in Sydney. But, you know, we get to romanticize it a little bit.
Yeah, just to remind our audience, it is summertime in Australia right now. And I think we're getting record lows as far as the coldness out east. So you got to experience it all. Well, let's dive right into it. It's very exciting to have you here. As most of our audience knows, we completed the acquisition of the National Stock Exchange of Australia back in late 2025. You and I did a roadshow across Australia with our fearless leaders, Richard Carleton, the CEO of the CSE, and Max Cunningham, the CEO of the NSX. And now that we're finally kind of formally working together, you're here in Canada to talk to all of our Canadian issuers and the stakeholders about the opportunity to dual list in Australia, right?
That's exactly it. I think to quote yourself, Anna, I think you called it our coming out party here in Canada.
That's exactly right.
Post the acquisition and show the newlyweds flaunting around.
That's right. Listen, you're a great partner, so I'm very excited about that. Before we dive into the opportunity for Canadian issuers, give us a little brief history and the story of who the National Stock Exchange of Australia is.
Yeah, fantastic. So the NSX has a very rich history. It dates back to the 1800s and the Bendigo Stock Exchange during the gold rush in Australia. We then had a bit of a change of name, came the Newcastle Stock Exchange, and then became the National Stock Exchange of Australia as we know it today in 2006. We actually think we might be the first exchange globally to ever tokenize real-life assets when we tokenized vats of wine back in 2001, 2003. We also held the taxi license plate market in Australia until a pesky company called Uber came around. But I think most importantly to mention, I think a lot of the reason we're here today is the acquisition of the NSX by the CSE, which, as you mentioned, announced in May, wrapped up in October. And I think it's quite an important step forward in the history of NSX and obviously the CSE. And I think, you know, in terms of what the latest happened, the first thing we did after the acquisition is we ran off and we got the CSE recognized in the eyes of ASIC, the financial regulatory body in Australia, as a recognized exchange.
Just to add to that, I think one thing that we were maybe taken aback by was just how quickly ASIC worked to formalize that with us, which just showed great support in Australia. We were really excited about that, about how efficient that move was. But let's talk a little bit about why this all came to be. I think it's important to just touch on, you know, our Canadian network understands really well how the CSE works within our Canadian framework. And I think there was a lot of synergies between us and the NSXA, which is why we started working together. And we started working together outside of us acquiring the NSXA, but why don't you touch a little bit on some of those synergies and what makes the NSXA stand similar to the CSE and maybe differentiate from other exchanges in Australia?
Absolutely. I think to begin with, I think where the opportunity lays was that the CSE saw an opportunity to grow a venture market in Australia, which is currently absent. Not sure if people know, but in Australia there's previously kind of one main exchange with one listing rules for all size of companies. We actually battle that notion. We think that one size doesn't fit all. So we can't be treating guys with a market cap of 5 million who kind of wear 3 hats in one job to teams with market caps in the billions under the same scrutiny, right? It just makes their life a little bit harder. And I think it's to the loss of the overall market and the investors.
You know, it's always interesting when we show up in Perth, you kind of look around at the buildings around you and it's BHP and Rio Tinto. I mean, some of the major mining companies globally are centered or their headquarters are in Australia. And, you know, on the other exchange in Australia, they really are, there is one rule book for those issuers as well as the explorers, right?
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
So I think what's pretty exciting is the ability to create that kind of venture market in Australia. And as you know, we don't really shy away that we might be a bit more ambitious than the CSE just because, there is no venture market. So we want to be a combination of the CSE and the TSXV.
Yeah.
Creating that alternative.
Okay, well, and on that point, I think that's the reason that we really did kind of come together, because we obviously have a very robust venture market here in Canada. Canada, I think, is known globally, I think, as a marketplace where startup and growth companies will come to list and raise capital and grow as issuers. And there is a real attraction to accessing those Australian markets. But it's always been a little bit more difficult because there is only that one-size-fits-all marketplace in Australia. Talk to us about the Australian markets. Why is this so interesting for Canadian issuers to go and raise capital?
I think I'd put that down to kind of three main points right now. I think the first one, historically, Canada and Australia have been a bit of a pendulum where there's different valuations in different markets. Yep. But I think at the moment, Australia is carrying slightly favorable, especially mining valuations. Second of all, I think the opportunity to give companies in Canada a pathway to reach Australia gets them accessibility to kind of 24-hour trading if they combine it with maybe one more other market, which is a big win for a lot of companies out there.
Trade all day long.
That's exactly it. And I think lastly, I'm not sure if many people know, but Australia's got a very strong pension system called the superannuation. The way the superannuation works is these guys have kind of offices the size of investment banks where they still do, unlike many other counterparts worldwide, do individual stock picking. Which creates a really big opportunity for companies out there in the Australian market.
It's an amazing opportunity. So to just break that down a little bit further, the superannuation program is essentially a forced pension program that all Australians receive. So whatever employment they have, their employer puts into the superannuation program for their pension. And as you mentioned, it still has the ability to get invested by the investment bankers into individual stocks. So the capital markets in Australia have this infusion of capital guaranteed every year, and every Australian is an investor. This also adds to why there's a real opportunity for dual listing. Moreover, than there's opportunities now for Canadian issuers, especially through platforms like Interactive Brokers, where you can trade all over the world on the CSE. But there is an extra drive in Australia, I feel, for a local listing because of the superannuation program, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So now Canadians, issuers all over the world, and Canadian issuers and issuers on any exchange have this opportunity to access a more venture-style growth, transparent, liquid marketplace in Australia. So let's talk about some of the sectors that are really relevant in Australia.
Yeah, of course. I mean, look, while we're here, obviously mining's a big one, looking at kind of two capital markets, very heavily based around kind of the 40% of mining exploring listings. So with that said, obviously that's a main market, but we're very agnostic when it comes to industry. So with that said, we're looking at tech. A lot of it, a lot of the companies we believe that used to be listed and were listed and became billion market cap companies, I don't think could be listed today. So we look at the, pre-revenue tech and at the experience of those young and entrepreneurship companies. Life sciences as well. Some of the policies in Australia have recently changed in terms to what level you need funding to become a publicly listed company, which isn't the story at the NSX, so we're happy to engage with them. And especially what we're quite excited about, which we're working in the newer novel side of things, so we're working with crypto listings or crypto-based listings. The exciting part about that is that there's currently none of that sort listed in the Australian capital markets at the moment. And we're quite proactive on engaging with the financial regulatory body to get these companies there. So we expect the first one to come around this year, which would give us a product not available anywhere else.
Absolutely. I mean, one thing that I find really exciting, because we obviously are seeing an incredible mining sector right now, finally, but I do find it exciting to finally see some startup and growth tech companies, crypto, AI, coming to the junior capital markets, which I think is really exciting. And, you're seeing that in Australia. So there's an appetite for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I want to next touch on, where we're seeing interest come to the NSXA. So there's a few different places that you're seeing interest level from issuers. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. We've touched on it a little bit so far, but even though the dual listing pathway wasn't maybe the initial motivation of the transaction, it's definitely been a benefit that's come out from it. So we're engaging, with 20, 30 odd companies already from the CSE, but also the TSXV and the TSX, looking for that dual listing access to Australia.
Yeah.
So we're excited about that, with the first ones coming out in the first half of this year for sure.
Okay.
The second one we do is transfers from our competing exchange. We offer a kind of fast track transfer program that is for 8,000 AUD, which is quite a minimal cost. And that's with the concept, right, that you're already listed in the local jurisdiction. So, just switch over exchange shouldn't be that difficult if you're feeling frustrations.
Yes.
And then, as we've touched on a little bit, is that newer novel side of things, which is the crypto-backed listings, which we think once we get the first, there'd be quite a lot of demand following similar concepts or similar listings.
Yeah.
After that.
Of the time that we've spent in Australia, what I was surprised by was also just this quite large private sector. And they just felt that you had to be a certain size to be able to access the capital market. So there's a lot of private equity and private companies that are quite excited to access the capital markets. They just haven't had the availability to till this point, right?
Yep, that's exactly what we're trying to do, right? Is lower that barrier to entry to capital markets. And I think it's a very natural point of to go on to a little bit of the listing requirements that we have at the NSX at this point.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have a free float of 25%. We've got no profits tests, no assets tests, and a minimum market cap of 500,000 AUD.
Yep.
We don't currently actually have any companies that small in terms of market cap, but the entry point is there. And then we also ask for 2 years of audited financials.
Okay.
That's not to say we work with a lot of young entrepreneurships and companies of that size.
Yep.
So in that instance, we're quite happy to waive the 2 years audited financials, completely dependent on the experience of the board members, if they've done it before, or the C-suites if they ran companies of that similar nature.
Okay. And some of these are very similar to the CSE and how we approach newer companies. I think the one thing that's important, especially early stage companies, is that they might start out as a small company, but their ability to raise capital is what allows them to grow. And, on the CSE, what we've seen over our 20-year lifespan is that we have a lot of small companies that have become very big companies. They choose to stay on our marketplace because they are happy with how their liquidity, their shareholders, their accessibility. And so, we hope the same for the NSXA as well. Let's touch a little bit on the paths to listing. Let's touch on some housekeeping. So you had just touched on some of the requirements, but there's a few different paths to listing with the NSXA. Let's touch on that.
Yep, absolutely. So we kind of got 4 general paths to listing. We've got the traditional IPO, everyone's very familiar with. Pretty standard across most global markets. Yeah,
you file with the regulators, you raise capital while doing so, and you file with the exchange and you go to market.
That's it.
Okay.
And I think I'll begin with, just because obviously we're here and conversating about what the result of this acquisition is going to look like.
Yeah.
But I'll jump to the possibility of what we're offering is the dual listing, fast track listing. Okay. That is consisting that if you come from a recognized exchange, i.e. the CSE or the TSX main board, and you fulfill our listing requirements, you are then eligible for a fast track timeline. We know we can get it down to 4 to 6 weeks, but with everything in life, the first ones take a little bit longer. So we're working through that now, but with the idea of getting it down to that time frame, and it's much more cost effective.
Okay.
The reasons for that is because you are applying with an information memorandum, which is a short doc form of a prospectus, which also has been quoted to be a bit of the 10th of the price with lawyers in Australia.
It sure is like hearing that.
Exactly. Cost effective, time efficient way to market. But what's very important to note that if you choose this strategy, you have a blackout period for doing financings or capital raisings.
Yes.
And what that time period looks like, it's 3 months before and after your listing date.
Okay.
So usually if, even though this is a very appealing pathway for companies, it usually requires a little bit more planning. So we sit down with the companies and see what we can make work in case that is attractive. One of the important things to consider if you're choosing that pathway is whether the company has Australian shareholders already.
Yes.
Because this brings out the question and the notion of liquidating the market once you have that listing.
Yeah.
It makes more sense for a company if you have Australian shareholders.
Yes.
The reason because of that is because you can do what they call transmutation, which is a fun word I learned this year. which is where you transfer the shares under the registry in the Canadian market to the Australian market.
Okay.
And you can bypass not having to do that financing from the get-go, which opens the door to doing kind of shorter doc financings down the road.
Okay.
Which, if you're organized and you plan it well, could probably mean a lot of money saved.
Okay, I think you brought up something that's really important for issuers that are interested in this is the pre-planning component. Because if you pre-plan, so you're going to need obviously capital to do the dual listing. You're going to need capital to go to Australia and do a capital raise. There is some capital that's going to be required. So you want to make sure that you have that capital in the bank. 3 months prior to your listing time, and that you're going to have enough capital for 3 months after before you can go to market, as well as if you have those existing shareholders. So planning is key. I'm assuming our issuers can access you guys directly when they're ready to do that and start that planning process, right?
Yep, absolutely. Feel free to reach out to me directly. Always happy to have the conversations, whether it's for planning an actual listing or just a matter of education. We're here to spread the word of the NSX and what we're here to offer.
Okay.
So happy to have any conversation anyone wants.
Very exciting. Listen, is there anything else that you want to touch on as issuers are considering making this leap to Australia to raise capital?
Yeah, of course. Look, and again, continuing with the theme of the venture market, we're also very issue focused. A lot of the time throughout the year, we sponsor many events where kind of a condition for us is to get our companies there and speaking.
Yep.
Again, market caps in the billions know how to do this. They've done it for many years. Company market caps in the 5 million level maybe don't have that experience. And there's a notion sometimes that without doing the roadshow side of things, you'll just automatically get the liquidity, which is a bit of a misconception. You always have to get out there and be speaking in front of the
Share
cameras,
the story.
per se.
That's right. The other thing is, one thing that we're starting to notice is that there is some added value too for Canadian issuers. Check that your service providers have a sister company in Australia that's recognized by ASIC, or that it has operations in Australia as well. I think that's helpful as well, isn't it? So your auditor and your lawyer, that they have some tie to Australia as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That helps. It's not necessarily a strict rule, but I mean, if you're entering the market for the first time and you need to get your financials in place, maybe a local counterpart would be more fitting.
Yep.
But I think it's quite important actually to mention that a unique role we offer here at the NSX is the role of a nominated advisor.
Okay.
For those listening.
Nobody gets scared.
No one gets scared. Please don't think of the London AIM and LSC nomads that people's hairs usually stand up at the back of their neck.
Okay, tell us about this program.
Exactly. So what it is basically law firms, auditors, stockbrokers, investor relationship firms that basically become partners of the NSX.
Okay.
They commit to learning our listing rules to then be able to assist potential issuers.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is that if you're a company coming onto the NSX, you're obliged to choose one of these so-called partners from our list.
Yep.
But again, look, you use them as much as you need them. You're not forced to pay fees of a certain X or Y amount. You just get billed for the hours you do need them, but it's another assistive hand, almost like training wheels, to help these issuers remain active and continue being successful and focusing on their business objectives.
Sounds great. I love it.
With that mention, you're not forced to have a nomad. If you're bigger and we're confident that you have the expertise, you can internalize that role for bigger entities.
Training wheels.
Exactly.
Okay, you touched on this already. I just want to end off with this. So, we were there in October for the closing of the acquisition, and it was also around that time that we received recognition from the Australian regulators. Can you maybe just touch on the value that this provides to CSE-listed companies?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we can mention it again because ASIC deserves a round of applause.
Yes, thank you, ASIC.
They did it in 4 weeks, which is almost, unheard of, but we're extremely grateful.
Yeah.
And I think it shows a very positive image of increasing competition in Australia, especially in the sense of capital markets.
Yep.
But no, that's great. I mean, it makes it a bit easier if you're from the CSE and a bit quicker as well from the main board of TSX. But it expedites the timeline. It gives you cost effective and it gives you options, right? Everyone likes options, and having options can be quite powerful.
Yes.
So again, get on the phone, give us a call, and we'll help you plan that and how it'd be favorable coming from one of those exchanges.
I think one of the key themes with that is just that there is a little bit more alignment. They recognize some of our policies. You may not need as many waivers for how you're reporting in Canada versus reporting in Australia. So it makes it a little bit of a smoother process, right?
Yeah. What the recognition of the exchange really is that it verifies that the exchange you're coming from is respected and is equivalent to that of what is in Australia.
Yep.
So by doing so, it cuts down a lot of the repetition of work, especially when it comes to reporting obligations, mining valuations, comparing the JORC to the 43100.
Yeah, absolutely.
And furthermore,
there's one other thing that you brought up, the 43101 and the JORC, since we are dealing with a lot of our mining issuers, is that a 43101 is recognized in Australia, correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. Eduardo, we could talk for hours about this.
Exactly.
I really hope to see you back in Canada soon. I know that your CEO, Max Cunningham, will be joining us in Canada again for PDAC, so hopefully we can sit down with him and have another conversation. Thank you so much. We are so excited to work with you and excited for the future for all of us.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Anna, and I hope I'm back soon as well.
Sounds great.
Cheers.